I am Annika Silva-Leander. I'm the Deputy Permanent Observer for International IDEA to the UN. This event seeks to give you a sneak peek of the inclusion portal produced by International IDEA that will be launched in the coming weeks. The principle of inclusiveness is really at the core of international policy agendas, as you all know, like the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Inclusion is highlighted throughout the agenda and has been a recurrent theme in documents, pledges, call to actions, interventions, and statements by member states, the UN, and civil society delivered since its adoption. And we know that addressing the various factors that reproduce exclusion and hinder the leave no one behind agenda is essential for both inclusive, sustainable development and for democratic development. And we also know that inclusive political processes are more likely to produce better sustainable development outcomes. So these processes are very interconnected. Over the years, International IDEA, which is an intergovernmental organization dedicated to the advancement of democracy, and we have observer status at the UN, has produced analytical resources on the political and electoral participation and representation of traditionally and historically marginalized and underrepresented segments of the population. The Institute now aims to expand the accessibility and use of these resources by creating the inclusion portal. And our aim is for the portal to serve as a valuable resource for all those working on issues of inclusions in the UN context and elsewhere. It will be an online, one-stop repository and hub of global information on the provisions in national frameworks and constitutions, political party and electoral laws on the inclusion of women, youth, Indigenous peoples, people living with disabilities, and LGBTQI+. During today's sessions, we will first hear from my colleague, Rumbidzai Kandavas Vika Nundu, Senior Advisor for Democracy and Inclusion at International IDEA. She's the lead author and driver of the Inclusion Portal, and we will hear from her what the main features of the portal will be, how to navigate it, and ultimately how this tool can be useful for you here in the room, including policymakers, UN staffers, students, civil society organizations, and others who work on issues of inclusion. We will also be joined by Krista Orama, Senior Advisor for Gender Equality at the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and by Honorable Caroline Agwanda, Advisor to the Governor of Kisumu County and Chair of the Orange Democratic Movement Disability League in Kenya. Our third speaker, Mariam Diallo Drame, from Mali and from civil society. She's not with us yet. She has had a slight delay. We hope that she will join us in a moment. We will hear from our panelists what the challenges, lessons, and good practice examples on promoting the inclusion of traditionally, historically marginalized segments of the population are in democratic processes and institutions, and also what the milestones are and what can be used as benchmarks to accelerate progress. Rumbidzai, will start with you for an overview of the Inclusion Portal. Over to you.
Thank you, Annika, and greetings and welcome to you once again. This is a Happy Women's Month, Happy Women's Year. So let's be happy and be able to celebrate women of the world for all the work and everything that we do to make the world a better place. Can we please smile? It feels so heavy. There's heaviness. Thank you. To build on the introduction and provided by my colleague Annika, I really want to emphasize the point that as International IDEA, the logic and the rationale and the motivation behind developing the inclusion portal is to show the gaps that are, of course, existing mostly in our national frameworks or legislative frameworks. And over and above that, it's to inspire democracy actors, stakeholders, practitioners, activists, whatever how we refer ourselves to take action and be the agents of the change that we'd like to see. Because as Anika rightly pointed out, when inclusion is not attained through democratic processes, we need to admit to ourselves that our democracies are flawed. And because of those gaps, we need to do something. So I will be working hand in hand with my colleague Amanda, who is going to be navigating through the portal. And as this is a pre-launch, it's a testing of how it will work. And in doing this, I also want to call upon all of you that as International IDEA, one of the issues that you will see as we try to navigate around the upcoming portal, the setup that we have now, is the fact that we don't have information yet in terms of case studies. So we are using this pre-launch event to appeal and call upon different stakeholders and actors to provide us with case studies that give us good practices. I don't think they are really best practices so far. The world is still having good practices, but not best. But can we share the good practices and milestones that we can profile on the inclusion portal for purposes of experiential learning and knowledge sharing? And hopefully, as we continue to do our work as International IDEA on providing technical and advisory support to different countries across the world, in all regions of the world, we can be able to use illustrative examples of what is happening. So the inclusion portal, maybe we can start by access the inclusion portal. I'm sorry for my buddies that have to twist their necks, but probably it's also good for issues of relaxation. So let's do it with some, grace into it. So what we have in terms of the functionalities, we are trying to show what is existing in national frameworks of different countries. Let's say, for instance, because it feels safe to use Finland as an example, because Finland is an International IDEA member state. So if we make any mistakes, we can rebuke and correct each other in-house, and it's still okay. No one will take offense, yeah? Krista, we are together. So if you go to the portal, what we envisage is that you'll be able to search for a country. And then with the country, once the country comes up, you can see the highlights, for instance, of the summary. We have tried, I know it's not very, it's not comprehensive, but we tried to just give like a snapshot of what we are seeing in each of the different countries. So far, we've managed to upload about 115 countries, but I want to admit that it's work in progress. So when the portal becomes live and you check on your country and the country is not there, please, we'll be honored for you to provide us the information which we can work with in terms of what is in national frameworks. And in terms of national frameworks for each particular country, we're looking at what is in the electoral law, for instance, and I will relate and explain why the electoral law, what is in any political party laws, because as International IDEA, we invest a lot in electoral processes, working directly with electoral management bodies, but with the different actors within who are engaged in electoral processes. So it's not just the electoral management bodies, it's political parties. It's also citizens, in terms of citizens' engagement. And then we have the Constitution, what shows what is in the Constitution, because as International IDEA, we invest a lot in constitution building processes because we believe that constitutions are a roadmap of any particular country in view of the country's history, because I don't want to call it history all the time. It's also history and history, and in terms of the present and in terms of the future, what the country envisaged. So we tried to summarize what we could get in the constitutions with regards to the different segments of the populations. And just a highlight of the fact that I'm using the word segments rather than groups, because sometimes groups tend to have a connotation of being small in numbers. But if you look at women, though we are always referred to as a group, we are not a group. The group meaning does not resonate, at least with my conceptual thinking, with me very well, because women are not a minority. We can be a minority in terms of being present in the positions of power and decision making at all levels, but we are not a minority. In fact, we are a minority that represents a majority. So we call them segments. So you will see the portal will refer to different segments of the populations. Then we have a segment on ethnicity and indigenous peoples. And this might not be applicable to all countries, but we believe in certain contexts it's very applicable. For instance, in Africa, and I can speak with authority as an African from the Africa region, and also even in some countries, a number of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also even North America. I think one of the countries that we have also included on the portal is, for instance, Canada, and I think we will get a lot of information we are hoping to learn in regards to the indigenous people's rights. And then we have a segment of the youth, and we all know, according to the demographics of the world, that the youthful population is not, they are almost 60% even of the world population. But if you look at what is happening in terms of the participation and representation in national parliaments, the youth, they only constitute about 2.6% out of the world population of about 60% youthful people. So it also says something about the issue, the conceptual reality around inclusion, in as much as it also affects women, the conceptual issues around inclusion. And of that 2.6%, we go deeper, again, you start seeing the gender dimensions, because young women constitute not more than 1% of that 2.6% of the youth who are in the national parliaments. There are about 45,000 members of parliaments. And I'm honored with the Secretary General of the SADC Parliamentary Forum here with us, Madame Bohemo, and I'm sure she can speak to that, because that's the work they are trying to do also in Parliament to push the agenda on inclusion. Then we have the segment of the LGBTQI community, and then we have the segment on persons with disabilities. So if you can scroll up a bit, scroll down, yeah, to show the profile, yes. So if you look at you select a country, it will show what is pertaining in the Constitution with regards to the rights of the different segments. Let's say, for instance, in the case of Finland, that is the segment if we're relating to women in terms of the fundamental rights. You'll see, for instance, that the Section 6 on equality in the Constitution of Finland, which clearly stipulates that no one shall, without any acceptable reason, be treated differently from other persons on the grounds of sex, age, origin, language, religion, conviction, opinion, health, disability, or other reason that concerns his or her person. So we then see that if the Constitution provides that overarching provision or guarantees on fundamental rights, our thinking was, how is that mirrored in relation to the implementation laws? And when I'm talking of implementation laws, I'm thinking of, for instance, the laws that are used to form and establish political parties. To what extent is there a fundamental guarantee on inclusion of all persons, regardless of their different being and identities? So the Constitution can have that framework, can provide the overall guarantees, but I think we know that without the implementation laws, be they political party laws, be they electoral laws in terms of how electoral processes can be administered and managed, the Constitution will not just be attained, it will not just become real by some evolutionary process. There needs to be mechanisms and measures. And if we scroll up again, we go down, yeah, you'll see that now in the portal we've included like the aspect on political participation and representation. And for instance, it says here in regards to Finland, that Finland is divided into municipalities which are administered based on the self-governance of their residents. And in those municipalities, I think it says something about provisions on self-governance in administrative areas larger than a municipality are laid down by an act in their native region. The same, yeah, keep scrolling. The same, that's the last one for Finland with regards to women. With regards to ethnicity, we moved to the part on ethnicity. But the point I wanted to illustrate was that if you look at what we were trying to do, the thinking was if there's a provision with regards to ethnicity and the rights of indigenous peoples in the Constitution, to what extent do we see that being mirrored, like in the political party law? Is it possible, Amanda, to check where there's anything on the political party law? Let's take, for instance, Nepal. Let's take Nepal as an example, because I recall that Nepal had some elaborate details. Let's take ethnicity and indigenous peoples, and we see. Okay. So for instance, in Nepal, that is what is stipulated in regards to ethnicity in the Constitution, and political participation and representation. What does it say? This is articles, yeah, it relates to the rights of the Dalits, and this is in the Constitution as well. Can we scroll again and see if there's anything that speaks to the electoral law, like for instance, if you look at the electoral law in Nepal, it even stipulates in relation to the list of candidates, like for instance, under Article 7, where it requires that political parties must prepare the closed list pursuant to Schedule 2, and these should have proportional representation of women, Dalits, oppressed tribes or indigenous tribes. Already, that reinforces what is provided in the Constitution, because the electoral law specifically now has a provision to ensure the inclusion of the different segments of the populations. Let's scroll and see what is written on the quotas as well, in terms of the different segments in Nepal. Nepal has a legislative quota for the National Assembly, and that legislated quota is it includes the representation. There is at least a target for women, and one Dalit, and one person with disability or any minority. And the reason why I'm highlighting the examples of Nepal is, for instance, the recognition of the different opportunities and abilities that the segments of the population have based on their identities or their ethnic background. And you will all recall that the Constitution of Nepal, for instance, and the follow-up electoral laws were developed in the post-conflict and post-conflict reconstruction phase. And these are some of the essential issues that the country was pursuing in order to make sure that there is inclusive democracy. I think one of the aspects we want to highlight also on the portal is, for instance, the existing international frameworks. So if we can go to the international frameworks to see what is pertaining in the different countries. What we have done under the component on international frameworks, we have tried to group the relevant international frameworks that relate to the different segments of the populations. So if you go to the portal under international frameworks, you'll be able to see which international instrument or convention, let's say for instance, is it said on the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and immediately you can be able to go to click to the link that states what is there. Is it the Convention on the Rights of Children, for instance? Is it the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights? And is it the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action? Is it the 2030 Sustainable Agenda? And this, we also believe that it will help different national stakeholders who don't necessarily engage in these processes at the UN, but a lot of stakeholders and citizens also tend to question the necessity or the relevance to their lived realities for entities and institutions such as the UN. Like they hear ministers, technocrats, yourselves, civil society actors and practitioners, you are engaging in the UN processes. And sometimes people are saying, but how relevant is that to my bread and butter issues? How relevant is that to my daily living? So in a way, in as much as, for instance, there are shadow reports or governmental reports and also civil society reports that are prepared, it's very important now for different stakeholders to be aware of what countries have ratified and what they claim they would want to do. And in a way, that should also inspire civil society engagement in terms of calling for accountability and ensuring that all these national frameworks, which are very progressive, and they are very comprehensive, but the thing is, to what extent are they translated into reality? I think we don't even need additional conventions and frameworks anymore because the frameworks are there. What just needs to be done is to implement the existing frameworks. So the international frameworks part will profile the different relevant contexts in terms of frameworks that are existing and that different countries identify with. I would like to go, for instance, to the function on infographics. Like I said, we are still building that. We don't have information yet, but when it becomes functional, you will be able to see which countries have different provisions stated for which different segments. We will actually generate graphs that will show, like for instance, if it's women, it can be able to show. Right now, it just shows where in the world we have different provisions for women, but whether they are voluntary party quotas or they are legislated quotas or reserved seats as an example. And we do the same again for young people, people living with disabilities, and then for the LGBTQI communities, Indigenous Peoples, and the different segments that I have cited. So we'll have infographics that can give a snapshot of what is pertaining in the different countries across the world. It's like 74% of countries of the world with these kind of provisions for these different segments. And the same also would apply for case studies. Like for case studies, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is where we are appealing to different stakeholders, yourselves and partners, so that we can develop those knowledge-based case studies that can be shared on the portal when it's functional. And the element of case studies, we really want it to be lively, not static, so that we can continue to upload information and illustrative examples as they become available. Then we have the function on inclusion resources. This is an illustration of what we have so far in terms of the inclusion resources. And what we've done is to try and pull the different existing resources or information from different actors. And I think that is very key because that will also help us in terms of even drawing some lessons from those inclusion resources. Like for instance, as International Idea, we have this resource on enhancing inclusive political participation and representation in Africa. So it's based on the work that we've been doing with the different actors in Africa. And at the end of the day, we hope it will inspire different actors also to share whatever resources that they've developed with regards to the different segments of the populations. One of the lessons I think I would like to highlight and share in the process of developing the inclusion portal was that there isn't much in terms of inclusion of the different segments of the populations that is stated in political party laws. I think what we observed was, for instance, if you take political party laws, especially within from Africa, it was clear, as an example, that there are several provisions that prohibit political parties to be formed on the basis of ethnicity, and that is very understandable, and that is very clear. But it tends to be more about that when political parties are being formed or they are being established, they should include all, and they should not be based on ethnic lines or lineages, or all the identities that we carry around ethnicity. But it doesn't, most of the laws, and this is not just about Africa, please note, most of the laws in political parties, they don't go beyond that, especially in terms of obliging political parties to ensure that in their structures, in their lived realities and structures, they are inclusive. I know we have, for instance, the recent model that we have been referring to, for instance, in Africa with regards to the new constitution of Kenya and what has been happening and what is provided in that. And whilst we can pick that as an illustrative example, we also realize that there are challenges and problems in terms of the implementation. But that is not essentially the purpose of this event, but just to say there could be some enabling legislative frameworks, but the extent to which they are implemented still remains a challenge. And I'm speaking to this especially in regards to ensuring that women are equally represented in positions of power and decision making at all levels. And I'm not saying this is only peculiar to Kenya. Lest my sisters and brothers from Kenya think I'm putting them on the spotlight, but I'm using Kenya actually as a best practice, as a good practice or example in terms of having an enabling legislative framework, though there are challenges in terms of the implementation, and I'm sure this is what we are all grappling with. And we believe that when we continue to develop the case studies, probably it will also help us to continue investing in tackling the barriers, because the legislative frameworks can be there, but if the environment is not conducive, it's not enabling, there is no transformation, especially of mindsets and perceptions and attitudes. Even if the law is enabling, we still see that there are gaps and there are challenges, and inequalities continue to persist, and other segments of the populations continue to be marginalized. I would like to stop here and say this is the overview. We hope it will be more interesting when we do the final launch, hopefully in the coming month. And we really want to urge and ask for your support in developing this tool so that it can be fully functional and can be useful to what you do in your different contexts. Thank you, my colleague, Anika.
Thank you so much, Munditsai, for this very interesting presentation of some of the key features of the inclusion portal. I think you've got a good sense of what it will cover, what it will contain, and also how you can use it both for advocacy purposes, so that you can look at international commitments that have been made by your country or the country you're interested in, and comparing that with the legislative framework, domestic legislation, but also for further research. We've also heard the call for more case studies. We encourage you to send along those because those are really the ones that will look at the implementation of these frameworks. We will now turn over to the first panelist, Krista Orama, Senior Advisor for Gender Equality at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. And she's going to reflect on some of the challenges, also lessons, and good practices on the inclusion of traditionally marginalized segments of the population, I'm not using group, in politics and political decision making in Finland. So over to you, Krista.
Thank you so much for inviting me and Finland to be here, to IDEA and partners. We are close partners with International IDEA, and it's really great to be here and to learn about the new portal. Congratulations for the portal. It's a really, as everything that IDEA produces, you know, it's a point of reference and resource material that comes really handy to all of us in our work, and we always appreciate IDEA's index information and research and resources, and this is just in that line one new one. So thanks so much, and good afternoon to everybody. It's really great to see that so many of you are here today as well. So we already heard about Finland a bit. It's also really good information for us, as I said, and with this portal, before going then to the Finnish context a bit more in detail, with this portal, what I appreciate a lot is that it gives us a joint framework to look at also what we can learn from other countries. I think that we all have so much to learn from each other. Now I'm presenting Finland, but Finland has just as much to learn from other countries, and as what somebody can learn from Finland. I think we're all on the same basis of creating legal frameworks and also implementing them in the best way in order to be inclusive. And I also appreciate the intersectional approach that you take to this portal, you know, in terms of looking across not only segments of population, but also how they intersect with each other already in the examples that you mentioned, and then also the inclusiveness of the process, you know, calling for good practices that I hope that you can get. So if we look at Finland a bit more in detail, Finland's democracy is built on a stable representative political system, a relatively well-functioning local governance, a vibrant civil society, and low levels of corruption. Women were granted the right to vote and to be elected already more than 100 years ago. So we have a strong history when it comes to democracy and human rights, but it doesn't mean that we are in any way ready. And as you saw in IDEA's inclusion portal, you can find basic facts about Finnish legislation in relation to inclusion, among other things, the basis, which is our constitution, which states that everyone is equal before the law, and also the different grounds of discrimination that we've made sure that is at the most up-to-date level with the grounds of discrimination that come from the International Human Rights Framework, that we look at also at grounds of discrimination in an intersecting way. And I think this is quite characteristic for Finland. We use the human rights framework both in our national work and then in our as part of our foreign and development policy as the basis for everything. And I think that also when it comes to democratic processes, the human rights basis is very important. So our constitution also states that it states Finland's commitment to promote and defend democracy, human rights, gender equality, and the rule of law. And then more in detail, we have acts on gender equality and on non-discrimination that then go more in detail on these topics, preventing, for instance, discrimination on the basis of gender identity or expression. And at policy level, our commitment to gender equality and non-discrimination have been reconfirmed. So we go one step, we aim to go one step behind beyond the legislation and look at also at our policies coherently with inclusion. And especially currently, we have a very strong government when it comes to gender equality and inclusion. So our policies, both national and international ones, have these principles at their very core. Our Election Act stipulates that a person whose ability to mark the ballot is essentially weakened may use the help of an assistant in marking the ballot. For instance, if you look at the perspective of persons with disabilities, and then it also stipulates that transportation services for eligible voters with disabilities is organized to the polling stations according to the provisions on transportation services laid down in the Act on Services and Assistance for Persons with Disabilities. So we aim also in our election act to go and look at different segments of the population, of which this is just one example, but we can do much more. So this is just a few examples to say that we do have a good and sound, I guess, legislation and policy framework which provide a good basis for inclusion of those that are marginalized in our society. But I myself, also as an international lawyer, I'm a strong believer in having strong legal frameworks which give us a good basis for action, but we can't stop there. As was already said, we need to go to the part of implementation. These are two sides of the same coin, and I would say that then how we implement the laws is then a litmus test for what we are really doing in terms of inclusion and non-discrimination. So I just wanted to highlight 4 examples on how we work in terms of implementation then of the legal framework. First, an example of programmatic measures to strengthen democracy, local governance, and citizen participation in all spheres of life when it comes to supporting political decision making for all. In the Summit for Democracy in December 21, we renewed our commitment to the National Democracy Program 2025. And through this program, we promote participation in new forms of interaction between public administration and civil society. And the program contributes to developing new ways of participation, promoting the transparency of preparation of policies and laws, improving consultation practices, strengthening the enabling environment for civil society, and promoting democracy and human rights education as a basis for public decision making. And as part of that democracy program, last year in November, the Finnish government adopted the government resolution on Finnish democracy policy for the 2020s. And this resolution outlines the objectives for the Finnish democracy policy and the government's measures for developing democracy on a long-term basis. Among other things, the government resolution will help strengthen particularly the inclusion of persons who are marginalized in political life. So it looks in particular on children and youth, older persons, persons belonging to minorities, prisoners, persons with disabilities, those that are long-term ill, and homeless people. And the Ministry of Justice is currently drafting a results monitoring framework with indicators for stakeholder consultation and to make sure that this measure is put into practice and is indeed inclusive. My second point is related to implementation when it relates to quality, inclusion, and also transparency criteria in the preparation of legislation. We believe that for democracy to work well, it is essential that the preparation of legislation is guided by these criteria of inclusion and transparency, and increasing the transparency of the legislative preparation process and the opportunities for consultation of stakeholders has been a central objective for the development of the legal drafting processes during the past decade. New methods of consultation of stakeholders have been developed and implemented at all levels, paying particular emphasis to ensuring that the voices of youth, language and cultural minorities, and persons with disabilities are heard. And to strengthen representative democracy, the government resolution that I previously mentioned pledges to increase voter turnout in elections for those that are not participating in elections as actively as others. So this brings me to my third point, which is that we believe that we need targeted focus on different groups that have, or segments that have historically faced discrimination. We can't only, look at segments as a large picture. We need to look at the different barriers that the different segments are facing. So, for instance, for centuries, the persons belonging to the Roma minority in Finland have experienced repression and discrimination in Finland and elsewhere in Europe as well. And the purpose of our national policy on Roma is to increase equality for the Roma population and to reduce employment and health inequalities in relation to the rest of the population, and also to increase their political activity. The program also takes into account the needs of foreigners or mobile Roma living in Finland on a temporary long-term basis. So we try to be inclusive of the Roma population, and these measures have been developed very much together with the Roma people. The Roma community's particular challenge in Finland is to increase the level of activity among children and young people and have their participation in public and political decision making. So the establishment of the Roma Youth Council in Helsinki metropolitan area just a few years ago was an important step in increasing youth participation, the participation of Roma youth. And expanding Roma inclusion in decision making is encouraged through political parties and umbrella organizations of civil society organizations, and also there are indicators to measure this progress in terms of how the Roma are represented in election candidates and party politics. And then another group that just to close up, persons with disabilities are a group that face very much discrimination still in Finland, although at the level of law we are quite well off, but in implementation we have many challenges. The Finnish Parliamentary Ombudsman has a special task to promote, protect and monitor the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities in Finland. And during the elections, the Ombudsman does unannounced visits to polling stations, and the objective of this is to monitor the accessibility and the opportunities to participate of persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. And for instance, in the parliamentary elections in 2019, the Ombudsman noted deficiencies in accessibility of several polling stations that were then, now we're trying to remedy that in the elections that are coming up in April this year. And the Ombudsman also pointed out that the right to a secret vote could be endangered in accessible booths. So that's also something that we need to look at better. And then we have a cooperative organization of all Finnish parliamentary parties, which is called Demo Finland, who also collaborates a lot with International IDEA, that promotes democracy by supporting collaborative projects between Finnish political parties and political parties in new and developing democracies. And a recent study by Demo Finland found out that all Finnish parliamentary parties are interested in promoting the participation of persons with disabilities in their activities, but we still need to get to the how. On practice, there are many shortcomings then in terms of accessibility and inclusion. For example, events are held in inaccessible spaces. Accessibility is not always taken into account when organizing excursions and visits for political parties, and websites are not accessible. So just to finish up, in November last year, a group of Finnish politicians visited Kenya to learn about the results of the Kenya Inclusive Political Parties project that also Demo Finland had supported and partnered on. And the objective was to learn from the experiences and good practices of Kenyan political parties in promoting disability inclusion. And this year, Demo Finland then supports the Finnish political parties in strengthening the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the work of parties. The parliamentary elections in early April will be a test in disability inclusion for the Finnish parties, also learning from what the group was experiencing in Kenya and the good practice that we learned from there. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Krista, for this very interesting overview. I think we learned a lot there. And thanks also for your honesty in pointing out some of the shortcomings of the implementation of the legislative framework, for example, when it comes to people living with disabilities. And very interesting to hear about how open Finland is to learning from other countries and from Kenya, and so that gives us a very nice transition to the next speaker that is from Kenya and that will talk about some of these issues. So we're going from Scandinavia to Africa and focusing on Kenya in particular with our second panelist, Honorable Caroline Egwanda, advisor to the Governor of Kisumu County and chair of the Orange Democratic Movement Disability League. So we will hear from you on some of the lessons and good practices on the inclusion of people with disabilities in politics and political decision making in Kenya. So over to you, Caroline.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Okay. First, I will take you through definition of disability that is in line with Article 1 of the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the four disability models. Okay. Then I will also. First, if you look at the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it defines disability as those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, and sensory impairment that hinders them to participate effectively in the society. It has four models. That is four models. That is charity model. This is where persons with disabilities are looked at as those that needs help. Yeah. Then we have the medical model. This is where disability is believed to be a health issue that should be treated. And we have the social model. This is where you're holding even a meeting and there is a deaf person and there is no sign language interpreter, or you're holding a meeting on 4th floor and there is no ramp or lift. So that's a social model. Then we have the right-based model. This is where everybody is treated equally. And this is what is recommended by the UN. This is recommended by UN Disability Inclusive Communication. Kenya, if you look at disability globally, 15% of the world population have disability. One in three women is likely to have experienced disability in life. 46% of persons aged 60 years and above have a disability. 1 in 10 children is a child with disability. If you look at, now move to the Kenyan context, the Kenyan population of persons with disability is 918,270. Women with disability being more, that is 523,883. Male being 394,330. Those ones are persons with disability. Looking at the legal framework in Kenya, first, the Kenyan Constitution, Article 2, recognizes the international legal framework and conventions that have been ratified by the Kenyan government. They form part and parcel of the Kenyan laws. For an example, the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that it forms part of Kenyan laws in regards to disability because the Kenyan government had ratified that. You look at the regional legal framework, that is the African Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This was also ratified by the National Assembly, and it also forms part of the Kenyan laws. Looking at the East African Community laws, national laws recognizes disability as well. Coming down to the county government, we have the county laws. We have, like, for an example, the county where I come from, that is Kisumu. It has Kisumu County Persons with Disabilities Act, which localized the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disability at the lowest level. What are some of the Kenyan government inclusion achievements? We find that stigma and discrimination has been a challenge. What has the government done? The government has created a disability awareness book, disability mainstreaming strategy, established 243 community-based rehabilitation and subcommittees at the county and sub-county level, ratifying the African Protocol I think I've mentioned that. Inclusive education, the government has ensured that learning institutions are accessible to PWDs. PWDs means persons with disabilities. And appointment of persons with disabilities in learning institution boards, teachers with disabilities employed as teachers, special needs teachers also employed. The government has also allocated 103,075 million. This is in US dollars, 962,936 US dollars on vocational trainings. Local government have also allocated funds for education scholarship. Economic empowerment, the government has allocated 264,366 US dollars on economic empowerment. Yeah, this for individuals with disabilities. They also offer entrepreneurial skills trainings and also provide places for trading, stalls where you do your business, and they are put with universal disability design. An example is Kisumu County government. The government has also offered tools of trade to persons with disabilities. Remember, if you want to be in politics, you need to be economically empowered as a woman or as a leader. Yeah, so the government has allocated funds to enable you become economically empowered, to enable you either when you want to do your campaigns, you are able to finance your programs. There is also 30% AGPO tenders. This is given to youth, women, and persons with disabilities, and the government also provides LPO financing for the tenders. The government also works closely with the private sector. An example is Kenya National Chambers and Commerce. If you look at the private sector, what they do, they've mainstream disability in regards to leadership and the programs that they do. An example is CCI. Harnessing technology and innovation. The government has initiated a program that is called Eye to Eye project. This in partnership to create and implement a National Council for Persons with Disabilities career portal that creates an interface that allows job seekers, employees with disabilities, and employers to overcome barriers to employment for PWDs. To further improve mobility and independent living for persons with disabilities. Government of Kenya provides assistive devices to PWDs. The government also, through census, used the Washington Group short question on disability to get the census on disability guided by the Washington Group short question. They've also developed and launched the Disability Inclusive Data Charter Action Plan that aims to engage the ministries, counties, that is local governments, on how to coordinate and collect data on disability. Employment of sign language interpreters. The government normally gives a call to government bodies, those who want to be trained as sign language interpreters, to enable the deaf access information. Government websites, some of them, an example is County Government of Kisumu, has an accessible website that enables the visually impaired to access the website and get information. The government has also worked on the walk paths that enables PWDs to walk. If you look at the local governments, the cities that we have, like Nakuru County, you go to Kisumu County, Nairobi is also, they're also working on that. Enables persons with disabilities to move easily. Tax exemption for persons with disabilities, those who have been employed. 150,000 Kenya shillings is exempted from, you are exempted from paying tax, that is for your salary. There is also duty free for car importation for persons with disabilities. So you import your car duty free, enables you to move. You can as well use that to campaign when you are doing your your programs. The government also especially the local government, gives license waiver to persons with disabilities doing business. So there is no reason of any person with disability not getting engaged economically, because there is license waiver, there is exemption, there are spaces that you can do business, but we will come to challenges so that we know what are some of the challenges. If you look at Article 54, Clause 2 of the Kenyan Constitution talks about disability, and Clause 2 talks of 5% employment of persons with disability. Every government body that employs, you advertise to employ, you have to ensure that 5% of the team employed are reserved for persons with disabilities. There is also representation of persons with disabilities in the parliament, from the local assembly, national senate. At the counties, there is two people with disabilities. For example, I'm a product of this, the Political Parties Act and the Constitution creates this position for persons with disabilities to be represented in all the assemblies, Senate, national, and this. And during appointive position, political appointive positions also, persons with disabilities are also considered. That space is also there for them. Then the government of Kenya, different counties have won different awards for being inclusive in regards to persons with disabilities. Challenges that we have. One, we still need to do a lot of advocacy in the rural areas so that the issue of stigma and discrimination can stop. This is why the government has worked on the awareness creation booklet. We need partners to fund different programs for disability to implement. We move from policy laws to implementation. We also need to ensure that all laws and policies in regards to disability are all implemented by the government. We also need to enact the National Persons with Disabilities Bill 2021. Also institutionalize the National Disability Inclusive Budget and national by the counties and the national government. We also need to showcase best practices of persons with disabilities who are once in the assemblies. What did they do? Where are they now? So that it inspires those who are coming up to get into politics. And also recognize the good political parties that have achieved this, so that they need to be supported. So here is where the partners come in, to support them work on their disability mainstreaming policies at the political party level, and train the political parties' leaderships to do what? To understand disability mainstreaming, taking them through the legal framework and support how this can be done. They need to also work on political parties' disability mainstreaming strategy. Then if this is done, the survey, or we need to do a survey on disability data and get more partners. I think the plan that now the government is planning to do is to finalize and adopt the National Disability Policy, enact the National Disability Bill 2021, institutionalize the National Disability Inclusive Budgeting across the government, both national and counties. Also ensure that national policy on technology and innovation for assistive devices is developed, implement the disability laws, undertake national disability survey, develop disability inclusive programs and disaster and humanitarian operation, especially during disaster, develop national ICT accessibility standards to be the first in Africa, the implementation of the rehabilitation service and assistive technology strategy 2021 to to 2026, increase investment in disability research and technology development program to enhance technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for this very interesting overview. We learned a lot. It was a broad overview of policies to support people with disabilities, so not just in the political realm, but I think you were able to show very much why the economic dimension matters for the political one, when you were mentioning, for example, how the cost of running for office and so on. So now we will turn to another part of Africa. We'll move over to West Africa and Mali, where we will hear also reflections from the civil society angle, which we haven't heard so far in the panel. So Mariam Diallo Dram, Executive Director of Association Femmes, Leadership et Développement Durable from Mali. You will give us some key reflections on good practices and lessons learned for the inclusion of young people in politics and political decision making in Mali. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I wasn't able to join earlier. So I'm going to share the experience of Mali, and we'll put it in perspective with West Africa, but the Sahel region in general, because there are many commonalities. So Mali is a landlocked vast country in the Sahel with a predominantly young population. Nearly 65% of the population is less than 25. And as I said, the reality is similar with Burkina, Gambia, Guinea, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, and Chad, which is the Sahel. And the region is hit by political instability for years. And the particularity of Mali is that Mali used to be an example of democracy for more than 20 years. But unfortunately, since 2012, we have become a country in crisis, a country with 3 coups d'etat, and a country with, which is currently under a transition. So I think for young generation and young democracy, it is never, we cannot take it for granted, because we were the example with Ghana, and now we are in crisis since years. And you have seen that we also have transition in Chad and in Burkina Faso, which is very close to Mali. So the uprising of population in both Mali and Burkina is due to terrorism in the region, but also to corruption and the aging of the political elite. So if you look at all these countries, the protestation against the regime was led by the youth. In Mali, it was around a young man using social media. He has a very big influence. And in Burkina, it was the same thing, and they call it citizen boom in English. So mainly, we are seeing youth getting involved in more, asking for more freedom, more renewing the political elite and for jobs and etc. So why democracy is collapsing after years? The reason are youth unemployment, corruption again, and insecurity, because we have terrorist activities in the Sahel. As you may know, we have Al-Qaeda, we have Boko Haram, we have what they call the Jinin. And we also have climate change affecting youth in general. So what is happening is that when youth are not participating in democratic processes as main actors, their aspirations are not taken into account, and this contributes to weakening institutions. But at the same time, we have very good example of young people working to strengthen democracy in all this difficult climate. We have, for example, in Mali, we have AGICAD. AGICAD is an association, youth active democracy group, and they do a lot of leadership training. They also do a lot of community mobilization around working with the mayor, doing activities in community building actions. They also have online TV, and during voting they do a lot of voting awareness, but as well as electoral observation. So this is a really good example in Mali, and they are doing good all around the country. And there is also the organization I chair, but we work more with youth, but young women, because it is important to say that when we say youth, it's not a homogeneous group, and in general, youth in this part of the continent and in general, the population is mainly young women. They are the most important part of that young population. So it is important to take into consideration this gender dynamic to make sure that young women are also equally participating. So this is what we are doing. So same thing, we do a lot of leadership training. We also work on women's health, particularly sexual and reproductive health rights, and also economic empowerment. Because again, it is difficult to run for elections, to participate to any development action if you are not in good health. So health is a key component of our work. And again, we also work a lot with young women with disabilities, because this is really missing in everything happening in Mali. So we are trying to strengthen networks all around the country with young women, women in general with disabilities, in order to get them also. So to sum up, I would say that the increasing number of young people in Mali and in the Sahel in general comment to ensure their full participation to democracy. And when not so, they will take democracy to the street. This is how they call it in Mali. And unfortunately, we will have more coup d'etat, more instability. So it is really important to encourage youth-led initiatives and to support youth employment, and also scale up reforms and investment to diversify economy and take into consideration climate change, but to tackle terrorism also in the region. I thank you.
Thank you so much for this interesting overview of the situation of young people in Mali. We are coming to the end of the session, but we might be able to take one or two quick questions so that we can have an interactive discussion. And those of you who need to leave, feel free to leave. We have the room for until 3 p.m. so we're not pressed to leave now, so that we can have a little bit of room for discussion. So we'll open the floor for questions, and I would ask you to please give your name and the organization that you represent. We'll take a few questions then. Over to you.
My name is Allison Brown from the International Alliance of Women. I have 4 quick questions for the website that's going to go live. We'll start with the URL. When it goes live in March, what is it going to be called? When you say youth, what is the definition of youth for IDEA? What age parameters are that? Because youth is used in a lot of different ways loosely, but what is it here? Those white countries on the map, are they coming, or are we not getting information from them? Or are you not getting information from them? And finally, the documents, the international documents, are those documents listed, all possible documents, documents that have been signed, or documents that have actually been ratified? Thank you.
Thank you for those pertinent questions. One more question.
Thank you. My name is Pamela from Kenya. And just a concern, I want to toss it to Karen from Kenya still. And we were wondering here with my PS about the statement that you made about the allocation of funds for people living with disabilities in Kenya, about the funding. My worry is whether it is in Kisumu County or it is in all the 47 counties, because personally, where I come from, I've not heard about the funding for political people who want to vie for any position, that they have been funded, and yes, probably by the parties themselves. But for the government funding, I've not come across it. When I was campaigning, I did not hear any single person with a disability saying that there were funds that were allocated to them for the campaign. So we were wondering whether it's a country thing or it's a county issue. Probably we can share some information about it. Then the last one, probably may not touch you directly, but because you are here to represent the PWDs, an area that I also have a lot of interest in the county I represent, the Embu County, is about the registering of the people living with disabilities. Because the information that we have that is credible is that the last registration that was done for people living with disabilities and the elderly and the vulnerable was done in July 2017. Meaning we have people living with disabilities who have not been registered, so they cannot access the benefits that a PWD person should be able to access. So that is one of the challenges probably I think we have. And we are looking forward to the government of Kenya to now start telling us when the next registration is being done so that they can also be beneficiaries of the same. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with Wendy. Questions from the Alliance of
Yeah, very quickly, maybe you can also share with us your business card and your contact details so that we can be updating you with the different developments. In relation to the particular question on the referencing to youth, we are using the UN standard or benchmark for defining the youth or young people. But I can't recall the specifics like in terms of the age. But if you check under the UN, that's the one that we are using as international idea, because we know it varies, but being aligned and in line with supporting all the UN conventions, we use the UN provision as a benchmark. And I think you mentioned about the international frameworks, whether the information that will be there will show which international frameworks a country has ratified, or are they only, or is it all frameworks that apply to the different segments of the populations? For purposes of managing the content and also the sensitivities that people can have, we didn't want to go into classifying them in terms of saying this country has ratified this, because then you can put and say country X has ratified, and then they say no, we are in the process of ratification, and you go back and forth with that. So we thought it's strategic to just outline the different international frameworks that pertain to the different segments of the populations.
Even though the country is not, it's going to ignore it because they didn't ratify it. Thank you. Okay, good to know.
Yeah. It can be a way that we can call it a country ignoring, but for advocacy purpose and for inspiring transformation, we put the information out there, because democracy is not a linear process, and hope people will be angry enough to say we want this to be part of what the government advocates for. So we put the information out there, and there's idea our policies that we are non-prescriptive. So it's part of our principle. Thank you.
So what countries? Is that information coming, or is it not available?
Which countries?
The ones that are not filled in dark blue, is it not available, or will it be coming eventually?
I can't give a definite yes or no right now, because this is still in development.
And the actual URL?
We can't give you that, not yet as well. Yeah. Give us your contact details and we'll revert back to you when it's functional. Thanks.
Yes, in a few weeks we'll have the URL.
Yeah.
Caroline, you have had some questions also from your fellow countrywoman.
Okay, fine. Thank you, Honorable. The figures I was giving, this is in regards to status report on disability inclusion in Kenya 2021, implementation on the Global Disability Summit. If you look at that, you will find all that there. That is on Kenyan status report. It's not something that has been allocated in the current budget, yeah, for use. And when I was talking about economic empowerment, what I meant is what the government has done or has committed to do in regards to economic empowerment for persons with disabilities generally in Kenya. And when you are economically empowered, you will be in a position to now take charge or take positions to go and vie for any political positions. So these are ways that the government has put in place to enable any person with disability in Kenya to to go and compete with other people. That is what I meant. Then in regards to registration of persons with disabilities, it's true the government is doing away with the former cards, and now people are going for the current disability registration, and there is registration assessment, yeah, that is done by every county, and the medical assessment is signed at the county level. That is true. The process they're doing away with the old card, and everyone should be having the current. So the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, together with the health department in every county, needs to organize for mass assessments for PWDs so that they get registered, and their registration signed by medical directors at the county level. Thank you.
Okay, I think I would like to really thank the panel for these very interesting viewpoints. Also thank my dear colleague Rumbizai for presenting the features of the inclusion portal, which will be up online in a few weeks. We'll be sure to send all of you that were here today the link once it's up and running. I think we've heard a lot of good practices here that can be used as case studies. We've heard about the Roma Youth Council in Finland, the National Disability Council in Kenya. We've heard also about the inclusion of young women in politics in Mali. So I think a lot of good practices that we hope we can document also for the portal. We've also heard about the importance of multifaceted interventions to support the inclusion of different groups and segments of the population. So going from the international level, the international commitments that countries have made, to national legislation, to implementation, also looking at issues of stigma and awareness raising, not just about the mechanics of programs to include these different groups, and also the importance of data. You mentioned the importance of data, Caroline, and the survey that is coming. That's absolutely essential to be able to identify these groups. So thank you all for coming, for listening in, and to the panelists, a round of applause for them.